For years, you have probably heard that inflammation is something you can fight with a single superfood, turmeric, ginger, green tea, maybe a bottle of omega-3 supplements. The wellness industry has built an entire empire around the idea that you can conquer chronic inflammation if you just buy the right product. And it sounds so simple, right? One ingredient, one supplement, one magic bullet.
I have to admit, Claire, I have bought into that. I bought turmeric shots at the health food store. I take fish oil every morning. I thought I was doing everything right.
And look, I will be honest, I followed this advice myself for years before I read the actual research. Turmeric is a wonderful spice. Fish oil can be beneficial, but here is what the science actually shows. The anti-inflammatory diet is not about any single food or supplement. It is a complete dietary pattern, and the evidence overwhelmingly points to one specific eating pattern, a pattern most people are not following correctly.
Wait, so the common advice was actually working against people? The turmeric, the green tea, the supplements.
Not working against them, but it has created this misconception that you can offset a poor overall diet by adding a few superfoods. The research shows something very different. A 2022 study published in Nature Aging followed 100,000 participants over 20 years and found something that surprised even the researchers. People who ate the most anti-inflammatory diet, their risk of dying from any cause was 25% lower. But the diet they were analyzing was not a list of trendy ingredients. It was a very specific pattern, high in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, fish, and olive oil. Low in processed meat, refined grains, added sugars, and alcohol.
25% lower risk of death from any cause. That is not small. That is huge.
It is huge. And the researchers were very clear about what was not associated with lower inflammation, taking supplements alone, eating one superfood while continuing a processed diet. The effect came from the cumulative pattern, consistent day after day.
Welcome to Longevity Lab. I am Robert.
I am Claire, and today we are tackling one of the most misunderstood concepts in nutrition, the anti-inflammatory diet. Specifically, chronic low-grade inflammation, the kind that quietly damages your arteries, your brain, your metabolic health over years, and what the evidence actually says about reducing it through food.
Claire, I think I speak for a lot of our listeners when I say I have heard the term chronic inflammation for years, but I do not think I fully understood what it actually is. When the doctor mentions inflammation, my brain goes to a sprained ankle, red, swollen, hot. But you are talking about something different.
Completely different. Acute inflammation is your body's emergency response system. You cut your finger, you sprain your ankle, you get an infection. Your immune system sends inflammatory molecules to the site to heal it. That is good. That is protective. The redness and swelling are signs your immune system is working.
Right. So what is chronic inflammation?
Chronic low-grade inflammation is when that immune response stays turned on at a low level all the time across your entire body. It is like a fire alarm that never gets turned off. It keeps ringing quietly in the background, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And over time, that constant low-level activity damages healthy tissue. It affects your blood vessels, your brain cells, your insulin sensitivity. This is why it is linked to heart disease, type 2 diabetes, certain cancers, even dementia.
So how does food get involved here? I mean, I eat a meal and somehow that affects my immune system.
That is exactly the question. And the answer is fascinating. Think of your gut lining as a very thin, one cell thick border between the outside world and your bloodstream. Every time you eat, food components cross that border. Some of them trigger an immune response, some of them calm it down. The balance between those, the foods that trigger versus the foods that calm, is what determines your overall inflammatory load.
I had no idea it worked at that level. So some foods are basically poking the immune system, and others are telling it to relax.
Exactly. And here is where the wellness industry gets it wrong. They want you to believe that one ingredient, say turmeric, is so powerful that it can override the inflammatory effects of the rest of your diet. The evidence does not support that. The research consistently shows that the whole diet matters more than any individual food.
So, what does the research actually show about which foods are the biggest offenders?
Let me be very specific. The biggest dietary drivers of chronic inflammation are refined carbohydrates, white bread, white rice, sugary cereals, pastries, all added sugars, especially in sugar sweetened beverages like soda and sweetened teas, processed meats, bacon, sausages, deli meats, and industrial seed oils used in ultra processed foods, and the most protective foods, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, fish, and extra virgin olive oil.
This sounds a lot like the Mediterranean diet.
That is because it is exactly the Mediterranean diet. The research is remarkably consistent. Study after study, the PRIDM trial in Spain, the Nurses' Health Study in the US, the EPIC study across Europe, all point to the same conclusion. A Mediterranean-style eating pattern is the best evidence-backed approach for reducing chronic inflammation.
But here is my question. I have tried following the Mediterranean diet. I bought olive oil, I ate more fish, but I still ended up eating pasta every night and calling it Mediterranean because I put tomatoes on it.
And that is the most common mistake. The Mediterranean diet is not Italian food. The traditional Mediterranean diet from the 1960s in places like Crete and southern Italy was very different from what most people think. It was predominantly plant-based. Meat was eaten maybe once a week or only on special occasions. Olive oil was the primary fat, not butter, not margarine, not seed oils. Fish was eaten regularly. Dairy was mostly fermented, yogurt and cheese in small amounts. And physical activity was built into daily life.
So it was a completely different way of eating, not just a different menu.
Exactly. And this is where the practical guidance becomes important. You do not need to move to Greece, but you do need to understand the pattern. Here is the most actionable insight I can give you. Aim for at least 5 servings of vegetables and fruits per day. 2 servings of fish per week, especially fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, sardines. Use extra virgin olive oil as your main cooking fat. Replace refined grains with whole grains, brown rice instead of white whole wheat bread instead of white bread. Include a handful of nuts or seeds daily, and cut back on processed foods as much as possible.
Okay, so the takeaway is that this is a pattern, not a single food, not a supplement, not a trendy ingredient.
Correct. And the research is very clear on this point. A 2020 meta-analysis published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology analyzed 40 studies and found that adherence to a Mediterranean diet reduced the risk of cardiovascular disease by 24%. Not turmeric, not fish oil alone, the whole pattern.
I have to say, Claire, that is a little disappointing. I wanted a magic bullet. I wanted to believe that my turmeric shots were doing something major.
I understand that feeling, but here is the empowering truth. You have more control than you think. Your dietary pattern is something you can change. It is not one expensive ingredient that you have to buy every week. It is a set of simple swaps that add up over time.
And here is the finding that surprised me most when I first came across it. The research on chronic inflammation is not about rare superfoods or exotic ingredients. It is about the everyday foods that most people already have access to. The foods that calm inflammation are things like apples, oats, beans, walnuts, spinach, things you can find in any grocery store.
And the research on the mechanism is actually really interesting. When you eat these foods, the fiber feeds your gut microbiome. Your gut bacteria produce short chain fatty acids, molecules that travel through your bloodstream and signal your immune system to calm down. It is a direct measurable pathway. The polyphenols in olive oil and berries reduce oxidative stress. The omega-3 fatty acids in fish reduce the production of inflammatory cytokines. Every single meal is an opportunity to either add to the inflammatory load or reduce it.
So every meal matters.
Every meal matters. And this is why the whole diet concept is so important. If you eat a highly processed breakfast, a refined lunch, and then add a salad at dinner, your inflammatory load is still high for most of the day. The pattern has to be consistent.
Let me ask about the supplements again. I have been taking fish oil for years. Do I stop?
Not necessarily, but understand what the evidence says. For people who do not eat fish regularly, a fish oil supplement can be beneficial, especially for omega-3 levels, but the dosage matters, the quality matters. And the research does not support the idea that supplements alone can compensate for a poor diet. A 2019 study in JAMA found that omega-3 supplements did not reduce cardiovascular events in people who already had a healthy diet. The benefit came from the whole package.
So the money I am spending on supplements might be better spent on fresh vegetables.
That is a very reasonable conclusion. Of course, if you have an existing condition or specific nutritional needs, that is definitely a conversation to have with your doctor before making changes. But for the general population, the evidence strongly suggests that whole foods are more effective than supplements for reducing inflammation.
I have been doing this wrong for years. I thought I was being proactive by taking supplements. What I should have been doing was completely rethinking my diet.
And that realization is actually great because now you know what actually works. Let me give you a concrete example. A study from the University of Barcelona looked at what happened when people added a handful of walnuts to their daily diet. After 2 years, the walnut group had significantly lower levels of inflammatory markers, specifically C-reactive protein and interleukin 6, compared to the control group. Not a massive dietary overhaul, just one serving of walnuts per day.
One serving of walnuts per day. That is actually easy to do.
It is. And that is the kind of change that research supports. Small, consistent changes add up. Another study found that replacing just one serving of red meat per week with fish or legumes was associated with lower inflammatory markers. Not eliminating red meat entirely, just replacing one serving.
So the takeaways are actually manageable, not overwhelming.
That is the goal. The research should empower you, not discourage you. You do not have to become a perfect eater overnight. You just need to shift the pattern in the right direction and do it consistently.
Claire, I want to ask about something I hear all the time. People say that certain foods are inflammatory, like eggs or dairy. Is there truth to that?
This is one of the most persistent myths in nutrition. For most people, eggs and dairy are not inflammatory. The research is very clear on this. Eggs are a source of high-quality protein and contain nutrients like choline and vitamin D. Dairy, especially fermented dairy like yogurt and kefir, is associated with lower inflammation in most studies. The exception is for people with a diagnosed allergy or intolerance. For the general population, you do not need to avoid these foods.
So, where did the myth come from?
Part of it comes from the fact that some people have individual sensitivities, but the wellness industry has taken those individual cases and generalized them to everyone. It is the same pattern with gluten. Unless you have celiac disease or a diagnosed gluten sensitivity, there is no research showing that gluten is inflammatory for the general population. In fact, whole grains which contain gluten are associated with lower inflammation.
So, the popular advice to avoid gluten and dairy for inflammation is not supported by the evidence.
Not for most people. And this is important because when people eliminate entire food groups unnecessarily, they often replace them with less nutritious options. Or they end up with a very restrictive diet that is hard to maintain. The evidence based approach is far more sustainable.
I have a friend who went on a strict anti-inflammatory diet and eliminated everything: grains, dairy, eggs, nightshades. She was eating basically just meat and vegetables. She felt like she was doing something good for her health. But based on what you are saying, that might not be the right approach.
It depends on the individual, but for most people, that level of restriction is neither necessary nor beneficial. The research consistently shows that plant-based foods, including whole grains, legumes, and even nightshade vegetables like tomatoes and peppers, are anti-inflammatory. Eliminating them could actually increase inflammation because you lose the fiber and polyphenols, and high consumption of red and processed meat, which was the foundation of that diet, is associated with higher inflammation.
So, the anti-inflammatory diet is not a list of forbidden foods. It is a pattern of eating that emphasizes plants and healthy fats.
Exactly. And here is what I want every listener to take away from this episode. Chronic inflammation is real, and it matters. But the solution is not a supplement, not a superfood, not a restrictive elimination diet. The solution is a simple evidence-based eating pattern that prioritizes whole plant foods and healthy fats. And you can start today.
I am going to make one change this week. I am going to replace my afternoon cookie with a handful of walnuts. That feels achievable.
That is a perfect start. And if you do that consistently, the research suggests you will see a measurable reduction in inflammatory markers over time. Of course, if you have existing health conditions, talk to your doctor before making dietary changes, especially if you are on medication that might be affected.
Blair, thank you for busting the myths. I feel like I can actually do this now.
That is the point. The evidence should make you feel more capable, not more overwhelmed. And if you want more evidence-based longevity insights, subscribe to Longevity Lab. New episode every day. We will be here to translate the research into something you can actually use.
I will be here too with my walnuts. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next time.
See you next time.